Kia ora, guys. Welcome back to the Black Jersey. My name's Max. I'm the host of this channel, and today I'm joined by a bit of rugby royalty. I've got Jimmy Marshall, who's the host of the Waterlad podcast over on Spotify and here on YouTube as well. Former player, now the assistant coach for the Crusaders backs. Real pleasure to have you on, mate. Been a wee while since I last interacted with you. For you guys who are watching this on YouTube, you can see an old photo of me and Jimmy when I met him at the Hurricanes game. So, been a while, mate. Great to have you on.
True. When was that? When was that photo taken at the
Oh,
Hurricanes?
good old 2020. I was still playing, so I was a bit skinnier, mate. Gotta
Oh,
love
mate,
it.
the glory days, good times.
Absolutely, mate. How are we feeling?
Yeah, mate, good. Yeah, thanks for having me on too, by the way. Love your work. Obviously, love what you do in the content space. So, yeah, stoked to be on.
No worries, really appreciate it. So everyone, we'll just rip in. We'll get to know how Jimmy's playing career went. We'll kind of talk about his podcast, now his career as a coach. So first off, Jimmy, I'll just invite you to talk the audience through your old positions, the teams you played for, a few career highlights, just all from start to finish. Take away, mate. No pressure.
Jeepers. Okay. Starting with positions. Well, that was pretty limiting. I actually did start my college career on the wing, then moved into 10 and was mainly 10 most of my career through Tasman. Went over to Italy when I was 21, played over there with Ironi. I was still playing 10 at that time. Got a crack with New Zealand Sevens, only did 2 tournaments with them. I was halfback for the Sevens, and then got an opportunity with the Hurricanes wider squad. So that's really where my career started to take off, and mainly played fullback for the Hurricanes. Obviously, with Bowden there was never many opportunities at 10. So managed to squeeze my way back in the 15 jersey and probably played my best years of my career there with Bodie at 10 and me at 15. Um, Played a bit in the Naki, 4 years actually, 4 years, only 2 seasons, but had some success up there. Won the competition 2014, I think it was. So good memories up there. And then I headed off to London Irish. Played 2 seasons over in the Premiership, or 1 season in the Premiership. We got relegated, and 1 season in the Championship, and then finished off in Japan while doing the Hurricanes as well. So, yeah, that pretty much sums up my career. Mainly playing 10, 15, but all around the world, some awesome experiences.
Good stuff, mate. The end of the playing career isn't always the end of your involvement in rugby, so it's great to hear that you've actually continued all that after a good decade at least as a player and everything. You started playing before I was even watching rugby, so definitely had a good innings there, mate. Before we get to learning about your post-playing career, the audience just asked me as well. They wanted to know like what the biggest career highlight of yours was.
It was probably a bit of a toss-up between winning the NPC with Taranaki in 2014. Like I mentioned, like that was a year where we were really written off. I think we were complete outsiders with the TAB. Obviously, Canterbury had won it so many times in a row. So winning that against the odds was a pretty special feeling. I was captain of the group at the time too, so just felt that little bit extra special. And having a small, I guess, town behind you, like man, we really felt everything heading into those final games. And yeah, it was such an awesome experience for me. And obviously winning the Super Rugby, pretty special. Hurricanes hadn't done it before. We lost the final the year before, which was heartbreaking. And then to win it the following year, 2016, was pretty special as well. So it's hard to split between those two for me.
Good on you, mate. The good old heyday of the Hurricanes. Still can't stop thinking about those. Especially the old play with Via Fafita just storming down the touchline and Bodie's intercept. Those two are bloody awesome. One of your recent pods with Tim Bateman as well, your former teammate, really enjoyed that. You guys discussed injury of Feb and how you had to retire due to a hip injury of your own. So what has actually happened to your hips that had to force you into that decision, mate?
Yeah, so I had pretty dodgy hips from a relatively young age. I remember being screened by the Tasman Academy and the physio sort of saying, "Oh, your hips are probably going to end your career. You'll be lucky to play into your 30s." So I sort of always knew that my hips were going to be probably something that was going to hold me back at some point. And I had hip surgery on both of my hips in, about halfway through my career. I must have been about 24. I was just off season after a hurricane season, missed an ITM Cup, or missed an NPC, but that was to hopefully prolong my career. Um, Not sure if it did or not, but I ended up getting to the point, the back end of my career, I was really struggling on them, struggling to put on my boot, like my socks. They were some of the hardest parts of my day, and just knew that I wasn't up to that level anymore. So when COVID hit, decided to get hip surgery on it again. And I basically knew that was going to be the end of my career. I sort of had the 9-month rehab to try and plan something for life after footy, or try and start doing things for post footy. And yeah, started a few things, and still doing most of them now, to be fair.
No, good on you, mate. All those injuries, like I heard the other day when you were doing the pod with George Bauer and Sevu Reece, they would have it a few yarns about life after footy. So it's pretty good to hear you took the same approach, eh?
Yeah, I think it's really important, eh? Like, it's hard while you're playing to get stuck into something, but especially if you've got some sort of time frame where you're out injured, really good opportunity for any player to give something a go, see if you like it. If you like it, then awesome. Then that's potentially an opportunity for you when you finish it. If you don't, well, then that's probably something you can cross off and move on to the next thing, because you're going to get injured in your career. So it's just making the most of those opportunities throughout your career, that when you do get injured, to either learn a new skill, try something, try a new job. I think that's something I've always tried to do. I always tried to do in my career, was try something while I was injured, and I think I ended up benefiting a heck of a lot out of that in the long run.
Yeah, that's good stuff, mate. So that's pretty perfect timing there with all those pieces of advice. So your What a Lad podcast, we can see it in the background, the glorious logo. It began in 2020, the same year as my YouTube channel did. Nowadays, it's one of the go-tos for a Kiwi audience. When, mate, did you decide to actually start the podcast during that injury time frame? Like, did you have any teammates encouraging you to do it either?
It was basically when I had the hip surgery. I started brainstorming a few things I wanted to do. Podcast was one of them. I was really enjoying Artie's one at the time. I was over in Japan listening to his as soon as they'd come out, and really enjoyed hearing the guys who I was playing with. A lot of those guys I played with, and was learning so much about them just from listening to the podcast. So I really thought it was a cool way to hear a bit more about some of these guys, and always felt like I was getting sick of hearing what these guys were like in the media, when I knew they were such different characters in the changing room. So I guess that was sort of the reason behind doing it. And Artie, speaking to Artie before I did start, he was awesome. Like, he encouraged me. He thought I'd be really good at it. He said, like, once when he was setting up his, he felt like I was the guy that should be doing it. So that gave me a lot of confidence to jump in. I didn't want to jump into his space, or at the time I felt like I might be trying to, take over his podcast, which was never the goal. So once he gave me that confidence to do one as well, or do one and him stop, or whatever it was, yeah, I just jumped at it. And the goal was to just do 7 episodes, because I heard that was the average most podcasts last. So that was the first goal, see how I'd find it. And then, yeah, I think I recorded my 200th episode a couple of nights ago. So, yeah, still going
Goodness.
strong.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You were talking a little bit about a growth strategy as well. Did you create a real big one, or did you just simply kind of hit up the old teammates, kind of the minute you had the idea to get on board, see if you could get the 7 over and done with?
Now, like, the first thing I thought it sort of did was got a notebook, wrote down as many guests I'd love to have on. Some were pretty ambitious, some were like guys I knew I'd be able to get. But I had a list of about 100 guys who I thought, man, I reckon most of these would be awesome stories. Like, I know most of their story, and it'd be awesome to be able to share them, or their personality, be able to share their personality to the people. So that was sort of how I started, and then just started crossing guys off one by one. And that list, I've still got that list now, and it's growing every day. I get requests for people literally almost every day, and yeah, still trying to tick them off. I'm pretty busy at the moment, so I haven't been able to get through too many, but the list is still growing. So hopefully in the off season, I'll be able to start ramping a few more, and then yeah, crossing a few more guys off the list.
No worries. We'll better ask a bit of a more light-hearted stuff. But of that stuff, you did a few pranks, I guess, earlier in the podcast history. My favorite one was definitely on the Fletcher Smith one. Before we ask you which one was your favorite, most controversial, etc., Look, let's just get as much insight on these things as we can, eh? Just hear about the feedback. That was a laugh,
Mate,
mate.
they all sort of started from my Hurricanes days when I was on the info committee. So I used to have to, most teams have an info committee where they get the young guys to stand up the front of the bus and um, give information about wherever they're traveling to. So I always seemed to get that role and I didn't enjoy it. So I just started making these audio like packages and I'll just take my iPad up the front of the bus and plug it in, and it would just take a bit of pressure off me, and I was able to get a bit better content going. And I guess that started to work. Boys really enjoyed it. So then one of the segments on the info package was a prank. Generally, most years with me, myself, Reggie Goods, and Mark Abbott would sit down and prank all the new guys who were arriving the Hurricanes that year. So
Yeah.
So I always had some good memories in that room upstairs there where we would just, write down all these prank ideas and see if we could execute some of them. And yeah, mate, so many good laughs. I still listen back to a few of those, and yeah, such good memories.
Always, it's always the off-field stuff that you remember at the end of the playing career, eh?
Mate, it
Bloody
is,
good.
yeah, and like some of those pranks, like you mentioned the Fletcher one, that was one of the early ones, and I remember that one because he was so gutted that we got him, and just his reaction, he was so keen to jump on with Smith
Yeah.
City, and happy to do
Bloody gold,
a,
eh?
a shout out on shout out on the phone.
As well as running the Waterlad podcast there, rather post-retirement, you've moved into coaching as well, as we talked about earlier. So, have you got, like, any pieces of advice on transitioning for, playing and into coaching and stuff, mate?
And that's a hard one because it was something that I always thought I'd get into coaching, but then got to a point where I wasn't really planning on doing it just because we'd moved around so much. So I sort of promised my wife that I wouldn't move through coaching. So once we settled in Nelson, a role at Tasman, I was still signed as a player. So I just asked if I could um, pretty much jump into the coaching room and do what I can to help out coaching or learn what I can behind the scenes before potentially an option the following year. And sort of work like that. That first year, I just learnt heaps off the likes of Andrew Goodman and Shane Christie, Clark Dermody, and those guys. And then the following year, an opportunity came up, and I coached the backs and did it the following year as well. And then Razer obviously called out of nowhere, really, and offered me a job down here. So that was the first real test where I had to really weigh up whether I was going to go down this coaching route or not. But an opportunity like that was sort of too good to turn down. But I don't really know how it happened. I was pretty fortunate, I guess. And I guess I was always sort of felt like a bit of a coach in my playing career. I always had pretty big input onto how our game plan was run, etc. So I always love that side of the game, the preview, review type stuff that you do. I was really into that. So yeah, I always thought I'd enjoy coaching, but yeah, there was a point there was I wasn't sure if I was going to go down that route or not.
I swear, mate, like when I see coaches these days, like you see Fabien Galtier from France, for example, it's always those key decision makers of the team. You guys always seem to be ones that go into coaching. Crazy to say. The
Yeah,
next question.
I
Sorry,
guess
keep
that's
going.
why. I guess a lot of players, you know, pretty naturally. Like even now, I know which players are probably going to go on to be coaches because they're the ones who are so quick to get in behind the screens, which is such a big part of being a coach. You've got to watch a lot of footage. You've got to enjoy it, or else it would be a hell of a job. You'd hate it. So if you don't enjoy that side of the game, you're probably not going to be a coach. And yeah, you see the guys who love it, the guys who really want to drive game plans, etc. They're always going to be the ones who go on to be the coaches, I think.
Really insightful stuff there. Really glad I let you say that because I think a lot of our viewers will really enjoy to hear that, mate. I was just wanting to get onto the Razer part as well. Like hear a bit more about it from your kind of point of view. Like you talked previously about how your wife wasn't really too keen on moving around. Like you'd been to Italy, Japan, England. Like what was your kind of reaction almost, I guess, when you got the phone call from Razer? Like, did you think it was a prank, anything like that? Like, what was your family's reaction as well, mate?
I didn't think it was a prank because I'd had a bit of a heads up from Andrew Goodman. He asked me, he said Razor wanted my number, so I knew it was Razor on the phone. But I actually thought Razor was going to talk to me about not taking the Crusader 20s role or Yeah, because one of the coaches asked me if I'd be interested in putting my name forward for that, but I wasn't too keen on that gig. I was happy doing my podcast, and I was working up at Nelson College, so I was pretty content with what I was doing. But yeah, Razer wasn't asking me why I didn't take that opportunity. Is actually offering me the Crusaders backs role. So um, once he'd called, I knew it was him, and I was pretty shocked. Definitely wasn't expecting it. And then, yeah, telling my wife was probably the hardest part. Telling her about the opportunity, and it wasn't a straightforward decision. To be fair, we were pretty settled up in Mapua, just out of Nelson there, beautiful spot. Kids were happy, so yeah, it was a really good decision, a really tough decision, but yeah, I think we made the right one in the end because yeah, such a good opportunity. I probably would have regretted it if we didn't take it.
Yeah, stoked to hear that. I mean, especially with like guys like Macca Springer, who you've coached at Tasman, like already shown they're pretty gun players and stuff already. Old Noah Hotham, another one, mate. He's gonna be a star. I think the old James Marshall analysis influence is shown as well with old Hotham there, mate.
Mate, those two are pretty special kids. I remember seeing Macca like the first time down in Nelson. Like he was just out of Waimea College, still so raw, so fresh, but just had a natural ability to finish tries and had electric speed, had all the skills. So it was just about sort of teaching him a little bit more about rugby because Waimea College
Mm,
wasn't much of a rugby school. Where if
okay.
you compare him to someone like Noah, who's been through this Hamilton boys rugby program, he's basically a full-time professional at the age of 14 or whatever he was. So he's got a lot more sort of game understanding and how that professional rugby side of thing works. But and he's a freakish talent too, mate. Like they're both going to have massive careers. It's probably when they're going to be All Blacks, not if. Those two, they're special talents.
Old 2025 is coming along. Speaking of playing and stuff, the audience they also asked me like if you'd be keen to compare the two roles as a player and the coach, like the different interactions with the environment. So for you guys in the audience, I'll just get Jimmy to run through the I guess the key differences between being a player and being a coach.
I guess the biggest one is you don't have to put your body on the line every weekend, and you're not waking up sore post game. Like that's the one thing I don't really miss as a player. But coaching, I think your hours, you're doing way more hours. Like pretty much once training's finished, you watch a few clips, but then you're done. Whereas as a coach, post training is sort of when your day starts, and reviewing, previewing, making sure everything's planned for the next week. And there's always something to be looking at, whether it's the training or pre or post or the game. How many games ahead are we looking? It's just non-stop, and it feels like you can never do enough. So you're always trying to do something. Your spare time is very limited as a coach, but as a player, I feel like it's a lot easier to switch off. Post training days off, you've got to get your body right. So there's a real balancing act there. So definitely different. I enjoy both of them. Love being in the team environment for both of them. And the management side's a little bit different to the player side, but I feel like I can still bounce between them pretty easy. And yeah, I do still love turning up to work. So yeah, even though it is big hours, I do enjoy the hours. Like I said, that review sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Might just go off the top of the head, be a bit impromptu there, rather with your mate. New Zealand, everyone knows it. Like we got a bit of a culture of former players going on to coach and stuff. Like old Jason Holland, Scott Robertson, yourself, Jimmy. Like every Super Rugby coach I can think of played at some stage, like either at a really high level or as a former All Black and stuff. Like is kind of being a coach the best way you can relive the glory days without like feeling lost in the world, stuff like that? Like, is that kind of part of the reason that a lot of former players end up going into coaching and stuff?
Yeah, I do think it's a great transition for any player because, like Timmy spoke about on his podcast with me, where he's all the six sort of pillars. Coaching ticks off a lot of those, pretty much all of them. So you've got all those things straight away. So you're not having to start again like you do if you're going into another job. So I do think it's a really good pathway for players, and obviously um, teams want to have ex players as their coach because they're not far removed from the game. It's so hard for someone who hasn't played to be able to upskill themselves enough to be able to coach at a high level. I think it's getting harder and harder, but not to say that it's not possible, but it's when the guys have just been there, they know all the games inside and out. They know what it feels like from different line speeds and all this sort of stuff. It's a lot easier to teach it than someone who's, I guess, just watched it and never really felt it. And I think players respect that too because you've been there. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more younger coaches pretty much transitioning straight from playing to coaching pretty quick. Yeah.
The old Jason Ryan guys like those, they are honestly exceptions to the rule now that you mention all those factors. Like it's a pretty huge big deal to actually understand the pressure of like walking down the tunnel and stuff. Like it's totally different just going out to your local grounds, just having a beer after the game and stuff, eh?
Yeah, 100%. I can't remember what level Jace Ryan played at, but I do think he played a relatively decent level. But even from there, he took a really long time to craft his coaching skills, and he's definitely done the time to get to where he is now, where he's arguably one of the best forwards coaches in the world. So, mate, I got a lot of respect for guys like that who have done their time and worked on their coaching craft. And when you watch him coach, you can see how much time's gone into it because he's very good at how he delivers and the way he coaches. So yeah, there's more to it than just being able to understand the game. It's how you deliver, and I'm learning all that stuff at the moment. And it's every day I come away thinking, man, I could do that better, or getting advice from, thankfully, some of the best coaches in the world who I get to work with. So yeah, learning heaps every day, and yeah, loving it.
Loving to hear all that learning stuff as well from you, mate. We've also noticed a bit of a decline with the podcast as well because you're just taking all that time to soak up the information. Like the game plan's starting to look a lot more expansive nowadays. Like compared to last year, the boys weren't really going too close to the touchline. So has coaching the Crusaders, like compared to coaching Tasman, is coaching in Super Rugby, I guess, been another level compared to the NPC in terms of like workload, and has that kind of impacted the podcast at all, mate?
Oh, it's definitely impacted the podcast. Like I knew that pretty early on. I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to get any episodes in, but I sort of set a goal early in the year that I'd try and get one out every 2 weeks during the season, and that hasn't been too bad. I mean, you can record them, in an hour, hour and a half, so it doesn't take up actually too much time. And on your days off or when you're traveling, you've got chances to do a bit of editing, etc. Thankfully, I've had someone do a lot of my editing for me this while I've been doing this. So I'm grateful for that. And yeah, I think the podcast, hopefully post the season, I'll be able to ramp it up again. I'll look to try and get at least one or two out a week, and especially during that World Cup, big plans to sort of double down on the content there. And I think that's going to be a really good time for content creators like yourself to sort of bring up the rugby content and see what we can promote around this Rugby World Cup, because it's going to be a special World Cup. We're looking forward to it, and hopefully the whole world sort of getting behind it. And yeah, it could be a good chance for content creators to jump into that space.
Oh, I'm not going to shy away from saying yes if you're keen to get me on as a return of the favour, eh, mate? Definitely going to be a good idea to get a few of the Tongans, Samoan, Fijian boys on in the pool stages. Definitely a few of the All Blacks as well. Probably just can't do it in the playoffs because man, the pressure's going to be huge. I thought I'd better get you on before those happen in Super Rugby, eh, mate?
Yeah, mate. It does ramp up pretty quickly, and the intensity, like some of these guys. And I know, like from interviewing some of the All Blacks, like they've got to be pretty careful when they're in camp around what they talk about. So I understand all that. So yeah, it sort of ruins the interview a little bit when when they have to be so careful. That's when they have to go to some textbooks answers, which I'm not really keen on getting from them. I'd rather hear the full story, or what they really feel. But I understand that if I want to get a high profile athlete on and at a high profile time, then some of those answers are going to take a hit, or I'm going to have to be editing it pretty hard to keep the All Blacks media happy.
Yeah, got to make sure none of the tactics are getting spilled because it's bad enough we got France at the pool already, mate. That's scary stuff.
Yeah, mate. Some game to start, eh? Like that's
Yeah.
going to be it's going to be pretty special, that one. Looking forward to it.
Oh, no question. Most importantly as well with we're gonna get back to the Crusaders, just one round robin match to go, mate. As we were talking about before, the pressure ramping up. Crusaders second on the table right now. The team's still performing really well, mate, despite the injuries. Like, I'm gonna hand it to you guys right here. I'm a Chiefs man, but I've really enjoyed you guys again this season. Like John R4, older than yourself, coming along from France.
Yeah.
Old Ruben O'Neill straight from club rugby after ages of injury. Been absolutely crazy. No Sevu Reece on the wing. Old Mecca Springer, we were talking about him before, stepped up big time. Fergus Burke at fullback. I never thought I'd see that. Good idea from whichever one of you guys made the idea because he's played well there as well. Do you reckon that you could lead the Backs to a seventh straight Super Rugby title?
Mate, I hope so. It's funny though, like when you talk about all those injuries and the likes of John Afoa popping up last Thursday for a captain's run to start the following day. It's been one of those seasons where you just sort of have to, just keep moving forward. Like we have a few laughs through it. When we heard that John Afoa was keen, 39 years old, not just older than me, he's like 5 or 6 years older than me. So I got so much respect for it. These guys have just put their hands up, jumped in. Um, yeah, without much prep and just done a hell of a job. He was awesome for us in the weekend. And yeah, in the business end of the season, looks like we might have lost another couple of guys last weekend. So it's only going to get harder. The depth has been really tested, but thankfully, like looking at this, our squad at the start of the year, like we had such good depth. And that's probably been the difference. That's why we've still been able to compete as well as we have, because the depth in the squad's really good. So we're seeing that tested at the moment, and hopefully through the back end of the season or the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we get a couple more guys back and we can be firing come playoffs.
Yeah, good stuff there. Might just interject again since David Havili's like one of the key All Blacks. Last time I checked, he was about 45% of the minutes that Fozzie's offered in the 12 jersey for the World Cup cycle. Losing him would be a pretty bad blow. I'm just going to be cheeky here, ask if he'll be available for the All Blacks and stuff, if you know, mate.
I think he'll be right for the All Blacks. I think that's probably going to come out anytime soon. But yeah, he had scans today. Not looking good for us, but I think it should be right for the All Blacks.
Yeah, hope you guys don't lose him and stuff. Be gutting to have another guy like that out. Like so much influence and stuff. You guys have got a raft of amazing players even after the injuries. Mate, been a real pleasure to have you on, Jimmy. Before we wrap things up, I'll just ask as well, like, do you have any more pieces of advice for everyone who's listening and watching, etc., etc.? Like, obviously, mental health's a big one. The comments that go too far, that's another big one. Switching off, there's another big one. Just like anything you got for the audience before we finish the podcast or anything, mate?
Mate, I do enjoy a little bit of advice. I always ask my guests that. And like I said, I've had around 200 guests on now. So I've had probably about 200 pieces of advice from different players. And it's always interesting because you always get something different from everyone. But I think one of the biggest things is just to enjoy it, enjoy what you're doing, be grateful for everything that you have. I know that's easier said than done, but there's so many things, no matter how good or bad your life's going, there's so many things that you can be grateful for. And when you're always looking at those things, you're going to enjoy your life a lot more than if you're looking at the things that you don't have, which is natural. And only things like social media have really emphasized that you're always looking for things that you don't have. But if you flip it over, you can be happy with some of the simplest things. And I think that's something I've always tried to do, is just be grateful for every little thing I have. Even if you think about something like weird, like just swallowing or anything like that, when you have a real sore throat and you're like, man, I just wish I could swallow without pain. And then as
I
soon as
feel
your
you in that one,
throat's fixed
mate.
again, you never think about it again. You never think about swallowing, but
Yeah.
it's not until that it's sore then you become grateful for having it. So, so many things like that, where it's just like, if you think about something like that and just be really grateful for it, it will put you in a better state than if you're, thinking about all the things that are going wrong in your life, because everyone has things where that aren't going well. And yeah, I just think if you can try and focus on those good things in your life, yeah, you'll be better off.
Awesome stuff, mate. Really appreciate it. As Drake said in his newest song, everybody, you got to take it from this veteran over here because if you don't, mate, there's going to be a rookie mistake. Thanks so much for coming on to the channel, Jimmy. Love your podcast, as I always say. Thanks so much for coming on, and cheers to you guys in the audience as well for viewing this. Make sure to subscribe down below, give the video a like, and share your thoughts on what Jimmy's had to say. I'll drop his podcast links down below as well. So, yeah, cheers, everybody. God bless you, and I'll see you later from Max.